Now, when you're ready to score an assessment, one that you've done for somebody, you can use your scoring worksheet, which is in the manual, and you're going to disregard any activities that were in the they do not do and they do not want to do category, because they're not going to be penalized for any activities that they have no desire to do whatsoever. So for their overall activity score, you're going to sum up the columns 2, 3, 4, and 5. You're going to sum each one of those columns individually, how many check marks you put, how many activities they do, either with no problem, that's in that second column, that they do with difficulty, that goes in the third column, that they are worried about in their future, that's in that fourth one, or that they do not do what they wish that they could do. So you're going to get the things from the first page and the second page, and then total those up together. So let's pick an example person. Let's just pretend that they had 10 things that they did with no problems, 10 things that they did with difficulty, 10 things that they were worried about in the future, and 10 things that they did not do but they wish that they could do. And then they would have had 4 things left over, because there's a total of 44 cards that they must have been in that they do not do and do not want to do pile. So we don't even have to worry about those. So we add all those columns up and we get a base activity score of 40, and that is what we're going to use in conjunction with another number that we're about to calculate in order to come up with our activity proportion score. So the next step for that is to multiply that number of activities in each of those columns by a certain score that we give to each one of those columns. So they can do the activity with no problem, they get a score of 1. If they can do it with some difficulty, it's a score of 0.75. If they do it now but they're worried about it in the future, it's a 0.5. And if they cannot do it at all but they wish they could do it, then it's a 0. And so you're going to multiply the number of activities that they had in each of those columns by the corresponding score. So in this example of where we had 10 in each of the columns, we have a score of 10 plus 7.5 plus 5 plus 0 for an overall score of 22.5, and that's your difficulty with activity score. So you're going to take the difficulty with activity score divided by the base activity score, which was 40, which we calculated earlier, to get the overall activity score, the proportion of activities just that are difficult for that person. So that's that 0.56 score. And for performance and satisfaction, we're going to just calculate a mean score for each of those scales. Take a mean of that if you want to know the just the average amount that the barriers are affecting their daily performance. A few years ago, did a study looking at the overall inter-rater reliability of the IHOPE, and any score above a 0.75 is good. So as you can see, these scores were really pretty good. 0.99 on the activity score, 0.94 for the performance, 100% for satisfaction score, and then a 0.99 correlation between the raters on the barrier severity score. We also looked at the internal consistency and the validity of the assessment, and it ranged from 0.76 to 0.96 for the 4 different subscales. So again, that's really good. And then we calculated the convergent validity and to see how it was correlated with the FIM, and it was very positively correlated with the FIM. So it's reliable, and it's a valid tool to use in people's homes. The other thing when we're planning what interventions we're going to recommend for our clients, the other thing we use is called the Personal and Environmental Factors form, and that form is used to just give a summary of the different factors that might affect the choice of home modifications. that you'll recommend to your clients. It's a summary of different personal and environmental factors. And again, it just helps narrow down the choices of strategy or of interventions that you could use, and it supports client-centeredness. They're not things that we typically assess formally. They're things that we're observing as we're going through the assessment, as we're coming up to the person's house, as we're leaving, just that whole time while you're there. They're things that you're observing and going to use for future consideration when you're making your recommendations. And it's really something that we've noticed that's associated with adherence. So the more that we've been able to consider these factors, the higher adherence rates that we have seen with the individuals. So these are just some examples of personal factors: the status of the disease, what their preferences are with personal assistance, their ability to maintain home modification. So these are all things that we want to consider, and there's certain strategies that we're going to take into account when an individual, or depending on what their condition is and how it relates to each of these factors. So for example, let's say somebody cannot afford to maintain a home modification, like for example replace batteries, so or pay a monthly subscription fee. So we're going to choose interventions that don't have those things, or maybe we could identify resources that are going to be able to help them maintain whatever modifications they might need. Other examples would be how likely they are to comply, how concerned they are for aesthetics, what their education level is. So just another example would be, let's say the person really doesn't mind at all what their bathroom looks like, and they really just care about the bottom line and if they can afford the modification. So instead of recommending something like maybe a taller brand new toilet that would look a lot nicer, we might just go to a local health equipment lending closet, get a raised toilet seat for free, and they would be just as satisfied with that, and actually probably more happy because it fits those characteristics that they consider as important. Some environmental factors to consider would be an example of who they live with. If there's children living there, other adults, either with or without disabilities, pets, just things we need to consider what recommendations we're making, if they will be safe and usable for other people or animals in the home. Other factors to consider would be financial resources, social support. Sometimes you can get, if somebody's active in their church, they might have a work day where they would come and could do some work around the house for that person and maybe install a railing, or change some light bulbs or things like that would be helpful for that individual. Another important factors to consider would be the floor plan, and also whether or not they actually own their home. If they rent it, then the modifications would have to be approved by the landlord and abide by any laws that govern that kind of stuff. Or if it's a condo, for example, the condo association might need to approve of something outside that affects the way that the condo looks, like a railing going in or something like that. Other things like weather conditions, or whether or not the person wants to be able to take the intervention somewhere else, that they can transfer it to a different location. Like for example, if they love to always go to Florida for the winter and they need to be able to take their equipment with them, we need to make sure that the recommendations for the modifications are portable. We've talked about the evaluation, and now we're going to move into more about treatment planning. So there's different things that make up our treatment plan. We start with our theory and just our core beliefs, and together with motivational interviewing, which we talked about earlier, we're going to use some of those strategies with task analysis to combine with what the results of the evaluation are to come up with our overall treatment plan for that person. So all these things are working together to come up with the best strategies that we can for our clients. And it all is kind of a process. So we're going to use that motivational interviewing to figure out where the person is in this whole change process and identify potential strategies for that person and solutions that they might be willing to assess. But that's being informed by our client-centered assessment and our task analysis, and then that's going to help us determine our final strategy, those things together. And it's just a process that can sometimes needs to repeat itself over as we're trying to figure out what solutions might be possible and acceptable to different individuals. So the treatment plan is generally developed over two sessions. We have our assessment session, in which we're looking at the person, environment, occupational goals, and things that that person is dealing with, and then we're also taking into consideration those personal environmental factors that we just talked about, and then we're using task analysis to figure out what skills they need to be able to do their activities, and then where the environment is not supporting them in that way. And then during that first treatment visit, we're going to talk about specific preferences that that person might have, go over some recommendations and see if they are accepted by that individual, and if not, start to take it a different way and see if that would allow for some better acceptance, and then we're going to come up with a plan. So I think I've said this before, everything that we do is basically in partnership with the client and as client-centered and client-focused as possible, because we have found, again, that that is an important part of the adherence to the recommendations. If the person really feels like their needs and wants are being respected and integrated into the treatment plan, and if they're a part of it, then they're much more likely to adhere to the recommendations that are being given. So the things that we've talked about that are a part of our planning process are the assessment results, task analysis, use of ourself and just our therapeutic skills, and then coming up with potential solutions. In that first treatment planning session, a big goal is to establish rapport we can ask them any of those things that we need to in order to figure out those extra personal or environmental factors that we may not have picked up on during the assessment, and going to start to identify the barriers and solutions to some of their problems. And this is where the motivational interviewing techniques are really important and come into play. So we're helping people either who are at the very beginning of the process and haven't even considered the fact that they need to make home modifications, or they're more resistant. We're trying to help them think through that process, or we might have somebody who's ready to go. And so we're going to approach those two people differently, but use our same skills in order to help them embrace the home modification process. We're going to validate the problems that they identified at the assessment with them again, and then help. And as a part of having them help us with the solution process, we want them to name and define the barriers, because then that's going to help them when we're brainstorming what solutions might exist that will, if they know what the barriers are, they might be, or it helps them to be able to start to come up with different solutions. And then we want to define what their outcome would be. What is their goal? What are they hoping to be able to do? Are they okay if they still need to have some help from somebody to do the activity? Do they want to be able to do it totally independently? Just kind of figuring out where they are and where they want to be. Planning visit, you're going to start to go ahead and identify potential solutions, and we're also going to, you might need to consult with any team members if needed, to get ideas for different solutions that might exist that you're not necessarily aware of. So, again, as we talked about, we really want to consider the client's preferences, and this is where that personal environmental factors form will be really helpful. We're comparing products that might work for that individual. So we're comparing how well they'll meet their needs, and that's based on their personal preference. So how much, or first we're figuring out what their priority is. How much can they afford? How it will look in their home? How will their family still be able to function? And again, we found that client-centeredness, being client-centered, improves adherence. As you know, we've been talking about being client-centered and making sure that the person embraces the solutions that we're offering them to make these activities easier. So we're just going to go over an example of what this tailoring client-centeredness looks like and how it's different for each person. So first we have Margie. She was a widow who so obviously lived by herself and had very few financial resources. She didn't really care what her stuff looked like. She was not bothered by medical looking equipment, but she had difficulty getting on and off the toilet. Then we had Billy, who lives with her husband, and she's very concerned about aesthetics and the appearance of her home. She takes a lot of pride in that. She's currently enrolled in a research study that will pay for her modifications, so finances are not as much of an issue. And she also has difficulty getting on and off the toilet. So it's the possible solutions that would work equally well for each of them in terms of just solving the problem of the low toilet height would be that they could each could have a raised toilet seat. They could have a toilevator, which is the riser that goes underneath the base of the toilet, or they could have the new comfort height toilet. So all of these would solve the problem of the toilet being too low by increasing the height. But each of them would choose very different options because of their different places in life. So Margie chose the raised toilet seat because it was the most affordable, and in fact, even was able to, she could got it for free through a adaptive equipment lending program. And then Billy chose the new comfort height toilet because it looked just similar to the one that she had before and did not have any kind of medical appearance to it whatsoever. So the solutions that they chose were based on their individual preferences and the factors that were most important for them. So during the second treatment session, that's when we're presenting them with the plan and the possible solutions, and then we're helping them choose that final solution that's going to meet all of their personal preferences, but then also help them complete the activity as independently as possible. There might also be the need to establish the team, which would be like the contractor if needed, or let's say they were gonna want to decide to do home delivered meals. Well, then maybe we need to figure out what service could provide that for them. We'll finalize the tailored treatment plan, and then we can initiate treatment, which would be starting to get some of those things in place. So we use a form called the Clinical Decision Analysis Form, which is a way of presenting information in an organized fashion to clients or participants so that they can make an informed choice about what modifications they're going to adopt in their home. And it's a way for us as the clinicians to present to them the different options that would solve their problems, but and then the pros and cons of each solution. They get to see it and weigh it and make those decisions. So, for example, let's say the person has trouble getting in and out of the shower, and the barriers are that the depth of the tub, the lack of the grab bars, for the transfer, and a lack of a grab bar because the tub was up on a platform to hold on to while doing that, and then the floor that's slippery. So things to consider, those personal PE factors. They've never taken a shower before. They always want to have taken a bath, and other family members use the bath. So we couldn't do a tub cut because other family members wouldn't be able to take a bath, and then they would be required to take a shower, which they weren't necessarily opposed to, but it was just something to consider when we're offering our solutions. So the different things that we could, or that we presented them with in this clinical decision analysis form was a tub transfer bench for them to use along with a super pole. And then we listed out the strengths and limitations on the far right column. They also could use a shower board and a seat so that they could keep taking a bath, but they could transfer in and out independently with a super pole. Or finally, a lift chair with a super pole. So these things, each of these solutions would solve their problem, but then the client gets to choose which one they prefer, which one they can afford, just which one they think would best suit their needs, and they can go through the pros and cons or strengths and limitations, figure out which one they would be most willing to adopt in their. Now you're going to have a chance to watch Mrs. B do her activities in the home after her home modifications were implemented. You can, before you watch it, have a chance to think about what you might have recommended for her and see if they are similar recommendations to what was actually completed. So now we're going to talk a bit about why tailoring our home modification recommendations matters and why it's an important thing to consider when we are making recommendations for people. So Mrs. B, who you saw in the video, is 81 years old. She had her below knee amputation about a year ago. She has good vision, cognition, hearing, balance, endurance. She has a strong upper body, and she's very positive and has the support of her family and friends. She also owns her home, and it's a large open-style ranch home, and there's also a family room that was finished in the basement, but then she had her master bedroom and bathroom that was on the main floor. After she had her amputation, she had some OT and got some recommendations for home modifications. And they were working for her. They were definitely not ideal. And she was kind of getting to the point where she was getting a little bit frustrated by things being the way that they were, and just wishing that they were easier, and that things, she could be more independent than she was. So we went in, and one of the things that she had said was difficult was getting on and off the toilet. Well, the problem, or the barriers, were that the toilet was low and that she didn't have grab bars. So the solution from the previous OT was to put a 3-in-1 commode over the toilet. The problem with that, however, was that she had a tight space and had uses a walker, and so she had difficulty getting in and out of her shower with that 3-in-1 commode there, and also would get tangled up when she was turning around with her walker. She'd get tangled up in the 3-in-1 commode. But the better, or the more tailored treatment plan was that she could have a taller comfort height toilet and a wall-mounted grab bar, and then a super pole with a rotating arm between the toilet and the shower. And the difference that mattered in her situation was that the 3-in-1 commode was great. It raised the toilet and it added the arm support. However, the feet of her commode were in the way when she was trying to do a shower transfer, because she had to, the way she did it was with her walker. She'd go in, turn around, and sit on that bench, but she couldn't get close enough with the legs of the commode in there, that she couldn't have the bench be scooted back in the shower, so she would have to sit on it and then hop backwards with the bench under her in the shower so she could get far enough away from the shower head to actually get clean. So now, by raising the toilet with the taller toilet and adding the wall-mounted grab bar, there was nothing in the way of her transfer. She could put the seat back, and her husband didn't have to come and help her do that hopping backwards thing. And so she was able to just do it independently that way. Another example for this same one, and I guess I already kind of told a little bit this story. So she had difficulty getting in and out of the shower, and part of it was because she didn't have grab bars, really a proper seating at all at the beginning point. She didn't have seating or grab bars. The shower ledge was in her way, and she had a fixed shower head. So the solution was that bench, the suction cup grab bars, handheld shower head, and she removed her sliding glass doors and added a curtain. Was the first treatment plan, but the second was to, and the one that was more client centered with her, was to change the toilet the way the toilet was before, and then to add a super pole, so that way she had enough support as opposed to just the suction cup grab bars. A hook from her towel, because before her husband had to come and bring her a towel, she couldn't reach it from her seated position. And then also a hook for the handheld shower head, because that was dangling down and she wasn't able to reach it when she was back sitting on her seat. So we got her a hook for her shower head, and then we were able to replace the existing curtain rod with a curved one to give them more room. She didn't like how the curtain would blow in on her, or it just kind of felt like it was cramping her space. So we did the one that curved outwards, and she had more room that way when she was sitting in the shower. The liner didn't bother her. So for getting dressed, she couldn't get through her existing closet with her walker, and the shelves were too high. She also would get tired in there when she would try to do things. So her original treatment plan was to use her front bedroom as closet. The problem with that was that she would really literally hop with her walker all the way across the front of her house to get to her closet. And at that point, she was usually just in her underwear. So she didn't love that, because she didn't like to be hopping across in her underwear, and it was just really tiring. So what we were able to do was to remove the door from the closet. They didn't mind that came down, and then trimmed just the bottom portion of the door frame so that she could get through with her walker, and then we lowered the shelves so that then she could use that closet again. So she didn't have to go across the house in her robe or underwear, and she wasn't tired from having to do that as well. She had more energy for doing other tasks later. So it just goes to show you that some of these things that seem insignificant actually really make a big difference when you're being client centered. That makes a huge difference in somebody's life. Then also, for in the wintertime, it would get really cold. So all we actually ended up having to do was get her offset hinges, and the door could go back on, and it was no longer in the way of her being able to get in and out with her walker, so she could get out on her own, in and out on her own. So now you can just watch this video, which shows her explaining all the changes that were made and just how meaningful it was that we were able to be client centered, and what a difference it made for her in her daily life.